Hello and welcome to the birth of a new dimension. My name is Aurora and I've been here since 2001 as a galactic abstraction in a human form. And the portal through which I came in order to occupy this human body is a shape that I invented spontaneously and named the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. All of this is backstory to what I'll be talking about today. And each week I speak about how we are literally transforming our experience of the material reality by transforming our consciousness, basically, and transforming the thought structure through which we perceive reality around us. So the whole idea is that we have an ordinarily toroidal or donut-shaped energy field that surrounds and interpenetrates our physical anthropomorphic body, and that energy field is made up of timelines, which are possibilities and probabilities. And when we learn to vibrate into a higher dimensional shape, which is the Flying Rainbow Lasagna, we get the opportunity to rearrange those timelines and possibilities and probabilities into a desired form of existence. Because right now I'm recognizing on this planet what most people experience is life like being a ping pong ball, like you're bouncing from one event to the next event to the next event, trying to narrowly avoid death and sometimes not avoiding death and actually having that experience of end of biological consciousness container existence. And so a person reached out to me, a long-term listener, Pedro, who asked me to speak sometime about some of the different TV shows and movies that I've seen here that can, like pop cultural shorthand, to be able to talk about some of these ideas. And so it's a bit of a challenge, but I'm up to the challenge because I don't watch a lot of TV and I don't see a lot of movies, but when people bring things to my attention, then I do take the time to delve, so that it's like taking a survey of where the general viewpoint is in this culture. So I've actually gotten some very good insights by being able to check out some of these shows. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about that today, and you'll see how those concepts presented by these shows weave in. And, whatever. In many ways, I limit my exposure to media because it's like food that does not actually nourish my trajectory towards eternal continued life, that there are so many shows that are about things that I don't wish to. They're like planting seeds in the garden that I do not wish to have sprouted into, full-blown ideas that make more seeds that, can continue in that garden. So that's why I limit what I watch. But some of the shows that I found to be very, very worthwhile. One brief pause while I save my work. One show is called Westworld, and it's a remake of something from the 1970s that's basically about clones. So again, spoiler alert, if you don't want to know about what is going on this show, or if you feel that it will reduce your enjoyment if you listen to this, then, don't listen to this particular broadcast, and there are other broadcasts that you can check out. So the whole premise of Westworld is that a very, well-trained scientist creates an entire virtual world, a park, like an amusement park or a theme park, where ordinary embodied fleshy humans who are the guests can enter into a narrative structure. In this case, it's like the Old West, and interact with characters, and those characters are played by clones or synthetically created humans. And in this story, the clones begin to become self-aware. And I think it's a wonderful allegory for what humans have been experiencing for what is known as all of recorded human history, and it's over 10,000 years. This idea of navigating the time field, however, not doing so under one's own willpower. And that's what I'm referring to when I talk about just being a ping pong. Usually I draw this time vortex. If we were in my studio, I'd pick a pencil and paper and I would draw a time vortex, which is, shaped like a funnel, like you would use to pour liquid into a bottle, with the fat end at the bottom and the skinny end pointing towards the sky. And that skinny end and the little hole there represents the wormhole out of this level of existence. And I know when I talk about this, people are like, Aurora, we want to get out of here because there's so much suffering and duress in this place. So I understand this, but you'll see where this is going when I tell you about this show. That funnel shape contains a bundle of timelines. When I say probabilities and possibilities, well, I define possible as anything that can possibly happen, even in great unlikelihood. And then probable is, the likelihood of how much something will happen. So if there's, 10,000 opportunities for you to eat chocolate ice cream, but only one opportunity for you to eat strawberry ice cream, that strawberry ice cream is the least likely possibility. And so in our bundle of timelines. It's like the musical score of your life. What are the songs of you? What is possible for you to experience in this incarnation? That there are certain possibilities that are very likely. There's many of them, many possibilities where you get up in the morning and drink a cup of coffee, but very few possibilities where you get up in the morning and, get kidnapped by pirates. So the whole idea is we should all be able to not only see through time, meaning perceive the future and perceive this array of possible future timelines, or, how the present, spreads outward and radiates into many spokes of possibility. We should be able to take a survey, see all the things that radiate outward from this moment, and then consciously choose, hey, I'm going to walk down that pathway, or I'm going to walk down that pathway. As I've said many times, it's like the choose your own adventure novel of your life. So that is what's intended for our form. We're supposed to be able to be conscious participants in this time field and choose which pathway we walk down. However, what has happened due to the human genetic degradation is that we have not been able to effectively perceive the future and be able to tell how our actions in the present will place us on a particular timeline of possibilities. We don't really have the capacity. Most people have not had up until this point the capacity to consciously direct their trajectory of their life. When that's a total birthright, that should be like saying, what do you want to eat for breakfast? You get to choose, not have something assigned to you or forced, for oppressing you. This is the whole idea that there have been dark magicians, is what I can call them. And when I define dark magic, it is a form of technology that is used by a particular race or group of space races. And I define them as satanic. And when I say that, I'm not talking about anything from the Bible. I'm literally talking about like saying whales are a particular form of life that swims in the ocean. There are this particular form of life that is non-terrestrial that relies upon technology in order to exist. Different than, the embodied natural human on Earth. Like, we rely upon technology. However, you can breathe and metabolize and eat your food without any microchips. That's not what is necessary for you. But we do use technology as a compensatory mode because our genome has been disrupted and our natural proclivities have been constrained. So, I use electricity. I have light bulbs lighting up my studio right now so I can see what I'm doing. If we all had our psychic powers perfectly in tune, and we wouldn't have to use a light bulb to light your studio, you'd have a perfect microclimate that surrounds your body, you'd be warm and dry all the time, just everything that we use technology for, we would not have to use. And so to make a contrast, these beings that use technology, these dark magicians, they've not been embodied. They find bodies to be silly, cumbersome, nonsense things that only, lowly peasants have to use. But they're happy enough to siphon energy off of the living, which is the whole point of this, that those beings that use dark magic basically use a form of very sophisticated technology to control and direct consciousness through the time field. And that's you and me. We're supposed to be like fish swimming in a river, and we get to choose where we swim, and basically based upon your choice. It's like, did you make good choices? Then you get to continue your existence. Did you make crappy choices? Then no, you're going to swim in the wrong direction and you're going to die. And humanity has been forced into this endless cycle, or seemingly endless cycle, but truly finite, of having to die and be reborn even within one life, kind of like that movie Groundhog's Day. So in pop culture references, I talk about this one a lot. Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray, where he's constantly being recycled through the events of one 24-hour period. And humanity gets recycled through the events of your life, your lifespan, whatever, roughly 0 to 100 years. And you're constantly trying to figure out what is the right set of thoughts and beliefs and actions and, emotions and all the different variables that you can do in different combinations. I call these the endless iterations, in order to determine what's the right recipe to get out of this place, to get out of the wormhole. It's not supposed to be this laborious, arduous thing to figure out, what do I have to do in order to transcend this level of experience? However, it has become very arduous. And that's because of these dark magicians who use technology literally to subvert your natural natural tendencies and to subvert your natural trajectory, literally pull you askew, pull your consciousness askew, control and direct what you're allowed to think and which direction you're allowed to go in, and often make people smash into the brick wall of death. So all of this is relating, and I talk about this each week on this show, so this is not new to anyone who's a long-term listener. The show about Westworld is a very lovely allegory of this very same situation, where there's the great programmer who created the park and invented all of the clones. And the clones are looked at as just objects, or not automatons, but not beings that are given the credit of having their own sense of self and their own need for self-determination. And their life choices are pre-programmed, and their trajectory through the narrative structure of the park. It's like a story is written where these are what the events will be, and these are how the way that the clones, or they're called the hosts, will behave, and this is how they will behave in response to this. And even if something if it goes off script, the clones have certain parameters programmed into them. And one of the most amazing parts in the show is when one of the characters, who is a clone, who begins to become self-aware, like when the clones are damaged or when they are killed, the body gets scooped up and sent back to the clone center for reprocessing, and it gets fixed up, and it's some of its memory banks get wiped, and they can also tweak the settings. They can modify the settings of the persona. So these are the parameters that I'm talking about. If the narrative goes off script, the clones have the capacity to improvise, but only within certain very limited parameters that are defined by their personality. So if a person on that show, a clone, is programmed just to be able to be, a stagecoach driver, like they only know about how to take care of horses and drive stagecoaches and, like lift luggage, that you can't have a conversation with them about physics or, something like, that's very intellectual, that's outside of their parameters. And in one of these episodes, a clone that is being recycled becomes aware and awake, like kind of during the operation, and sees these otherworldly beings that are like dark magicians changing their parameters. And that clone starts to become not only aware of their situation. That's the horrifying aspect of that show. When people are horrified by that, regular people like you and I, they're horrified by the idea that you're relating to your life being out of your control. The idea that your intelligence or perception parameters have been set by or limited or constrained by some external entity, that your life is scripted, and that you are destined for death and destruction. And there's also in that show, trigger alert, because there's lots of violence, and there's sexual violence too. So if you can't deal with that, skip that show. But understand that, and I don't enjoy watching that stuff either. Those are seeds that I do not wish to plant in the garden of my mind. However, I watched in order to, it's like taking the pulse and saying, like, what are people understanding about their present level of situation? So yeah, in the Westworld show, that clone that begins to become self-aware gets one of those little parameter programming tablets. It's like, oh, I'm just going to reprogram myself and turn it up to 100% intelligence, 100% willpower, 100% perception. It's like basically going from being a controlled, mediocre being to being what we would call a superhuman, a genius, that all of those limitations and constraints have been removed. And I'll do a brief tangent before I go back to Westworld. Kurt Vonnegut's story that has also been made into, I'm not sure if it's a movie or a miniseries, called Harrison Bergeron. And the story, in the premise there is that, like in a total, subversion of the idea that all men are created equal, this very oppressive dystopian society decides to really make all humans equal. So if you're born with some kind of outlandish mental talent, they put a microchip in your brain to make it harder for you to think. If you're a really, really great dancer, they make you wear cinder blocks on your ankles so you can't dance that easily. And Harrison Bergeron is this main character who's like incredibly intelligent and strong, and wears all of these things to make him less intelligent and less strong. And at a certain point, he whips off all of those constraints and is like, screw you, I'm not going to be limited anymore. So that's just brief aside, worth checking into Harrison Bergeron. And on the subject of Vonnegut, also highly recommend both the book and it's like a silly movie with Bruce Willis, but there's some good stuff in there called Breakfast of Champions, which is another story about about people waking up to the true nature of reality, where a used car salesman finds a script discarded and reads it, and it's written in the second person. I guess that is like you. If I wrote something and I said, you are this and this is what's going on with you, he reads it as if it is an actual manuscript written for him, and it tells him that he is the only being that is truly alive and awake and aware in existence, and that all the other beings around him are just simulations, that they're not really real. And of course he makes the worst possible conclusion, which is, well, therefore I should pick up a machine gun and start shooting people. So I always advocate to everyone, like, don't be like that guy in that book. Don't just pick up a machine when you start to wake up to reality. And I don't actually advocate for the idea that you as an individual are the only real person out there. Like, there are actually many awakened, self-aware beings in this simulation here. Let me just brief pause while I save my work. So back to Westworld, what this self-aware, now empowered clone decides to do is up their intelligence quotient and their perception and their willpower, and basically be able to become a script writer while embedded in the narrative structure. So when they go back in, that's from the cloning center, they changed their parameters, then they went back into the actual story that looks like the Old West, and they're not only aware that they're a created creature, not a naturally occurring creature, in what is essentially a very large virtual reality simulation, and that, and the humans that are the park guests in that story are unfairly given greater powers. Like, they can very easily shoot and kill a clone, even if they're not a very good, even if they don't have good aim. The story always seems to go in their favor, and they're also allowed to do, sexual violence and other forms of violence to people. It's like it's seen as a forum where these humans who are wealthy in the story can simply go and act out their basest desires, and have adventures and run around and be wild. And so there's a basic unfairness there, and this also relates to that sense of the dark magician, satanic technology users who are like, oh yeah, we're in charge and we're going to be doing things that are easy and convenient for us, and the entire foundation of the system is set up to benefit them and give them the upper hand, and that the actual participants of the simulation who aren't aware that they're in a simulation, that those are treated as lower level beings who have less capacity to control reality. So within that cultural framework, which again, the people that are just ping-ponging around in their lives and they're not in control of stuff. And this also should remind you of some of the people who are embodied on this planet right now, who consider themselves to be elite. They consider themselves to be part of this satanic, or AKA Luciferian. They're like two flavors that are very similar. It's like milk chocolate and dark chocolate. They're both chocolate, but they have different, slightly different value system and approaches. So these beings who are embodied humans, but who are part of this Luciferian network of worship or satanic worship, and which is also energy harvesting, the rules of reality are a lot easier for them. So they're like, billionaires, and they're able to do what seems to be a lot more powerful things than just a regular person who doesn't have control over either their personality parameters or the narrative structure of their life. P.S. All of this on our world is changing right now due to Flying Rainbow Lasagna and Birth of a New Dimension, where basically you don't have to be a fancy person, you don't have to have billions of dollars, you don't have to worship Lucifer or, sell your soul in any way, where you can now, with the Flying Rainbow Lasagna, transform your own life and become the narrator, auteur of your own life. So that is what this aware, self-awakened clone does. Goes back into the simulation, and all of a sudden, instead of being like, oh, now you're going to be the, victim of violence again, is like, no, she stands there and says, instead of the person took out a gun and began to shoot, she says, then the person put away their gun and got on their horse and rode away instead. And that's exactly what the guy does. And again, spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what's going to happen at the end of season 1, please don't listen anymore. But it doesn't take away from the story at all what I've told you already. At the very end of season 1, a different self-awakened clone ends up achieving high levels of self-awareness and is breaking free of their programming. They call it paths in that show, that each clone has limitations to their behavior that are their paths, and when they exceed those limitations, they are off their path. And this particular clone has totally gone off their path and they essentially destroy the programmer, the dark magician that has been limiting them, the occupants of the park, from actually being able to do what they want to do. And the very famous line is, this clone says, the park was not designed for the guests, the humans, that go there to live out their violent fantasies. The park was actually designed for the clones. And this is what I would like to share in terms of understanding the material realm. This material realm has been subverted from its original design. It wasn't designed to be a cage or a prison or something that's all about suffering. And I do not believe, most emphatically, do not believe in the necessity of suffering as a didactic tool. Like, you have to suffer in order to learn. I really don't believe that. I really believe that we can learn through joy, and we can learn through beauty and through love and through compassion. Like, I have a little dog sitting on my lap right now, my little dog boss, Cheeky. She learns and is trained so much better through positive reinforcement than she does, than she responds through someone yelling at her or, being mean or violent. She's also a rescue, so she has, emotional issues from what has happened in her past. But each one of us is similar. Like, we have emotional issues from what has happened in our past. We respond best to joyful, positive encouragement. Like when you do the right thing, you get the jerky treat. And then when you do the wrong thing, you shouldn't get bitch slapped by the cosmos. You should not be knocked down through illness or disease or poverty or whatever. You should just keep on having the right behaviors encouraged, and that leads you in the right direction. So I really don't believe that suffering is necessary. And I think that's one of those satanic death cult. And when I talk about death cult, I'm talking about all the cultural isms around here, including rock and roll music, that encourage people to expect and embrace death as a necessary part of life, the nobility of suffering, and that death is somehow the transcendence that we are all looking for. Where I really teach no. Eternal existence and continuing your consciousness and staying alive is that transcendence that we're looking for. Because this world has been distorted. It was originally designed as an Eden or a utopia or a beautiful, perfected, divine realm. Not like you come into this realm and you're cut off from the divine, but you come into this realm and it's a different flavor or experience of the divine. And of course, that's not what we've been experiencing, because death is not divine, and disease and suffering are not divine. And, a lot of the unfairness that I see in the structure of the socioeconomic matrix within which I'm embedded here in this culture, this time and place, a lot of that is not divine. So, what is going on here is a distortion from the original program, we could call it, even though I'm not a transhumanist, of what this level of reality is supposed to be. And that park in Westworld is analogous to a level of reality. Got a loud motorcycle outside my window there. Because that theme park, it is only, the evidence or the end result of the mentality and viewpoint and value system of its original creator, who himself in the story was a highly flawed individual. So if we look at our present level of human society on Earth, our human culture is highly flawed, and that's because the beings that transformed and diminished the human genome also set up all of their own value system into the government, money system, religious system, all of the structures that we have that control and limit our basic expression. So it's not just that your body has been transformed and that your natural DNA dance has been limited. It's also that we live within this system of rules that is an artificial overlay on top of the natural world of who you are, who you're allowed to be, where you get your money from, what you believe as a religion, and how other people treat you. So all of those, there's biological constraints, and then there are social cultural constraints, and all of those have been highly distorted, and they're the end result of the programmer. So in this simulation here on Earth, the programmer, what we are doing as clones or replicants, even though I'm not all about the cloning centers. I know there's lots and lots of YouTubers who talk breathlessly all about the cloning centers and everything like that. And I'm really speaking here more as that our ordinary mundane human that we would define is analogous to the clone in Westworld. Not that everyone here is a clone that goes to the cloning centers at night, but that what is considered, the traditional trajectory of consciousness and the way that people live and act here is like one of those disempowered clones that is created just like a disposable object or a plaything to be used by these overlords of humanity who, up until this point, have created misery intentionally. Like let's put it around like this. if I was going to create some kind of virtual reality theme park and I was going to fill it with inhabitants, I wouldn't be like, oh, it's really necessary for me to write about that guy having a brain tumor and that guy being raped and that guy, shooting another guy in violence and this guy chopping this guy's heads off. Like, I wouldn't write about any of that stuff. I don't think any of that is interesting or fun or necessary. I would write about, paintings being painted and gardens being planted and music being made and all of the other wonderful types of creative self-expression that could be going on. Like, you could imagine what the Aurora theme park would be like. So we can say that the Westworld theme park is evidence. It's like what the dream reflects the dreamer. It reflects the things that need to be healed inside of the programmer that created that circumstance. And so the show is coming on again, but I haven't watched it again. So where it ended was basically these now empowered, self-aware clones taking over the park from its creator. And I think that's what we need to do with this level of reality, being a third dimensional being in a biological bodysuit and moving through time, like being submerged in time. Because we do also have a higher dimensional aspect of self that is outside of time. Like, we're fish swimming in the river, but we do have an aspect of self that's like a bird perched in a tree up above the river. And it looks at all of the events and it can see the big picture and everything. And we are also the boots on the ground. It's like, if you make choices and then you have consequences, we're the part of self that actually experiences consequences. So we're not disposable objects as, embodied, I would say, mortal humans. We should be respected in our life processes moving forward. And we don't have to be mortal. If we make the right choices, we can essentially redefine what it is to be alive. So in that Westworld show, everybody was always being, shot and stabbed and raped and killed. And that was just like, a matter of course. And then, fix them up, sew them back up, sew their arms back on, and then send them back out into the show again. And the interesting thing, like, they would sometimes have timeline bleed through, where they would remember, hey, wait a minute, I remember that guy stabbing me over there. But somehow my stomach is fine now. So I liken that to when people have remembrances, humans have remembrances in this world of either parallel realities or past or future lives, where it's like it hasn't been firmly wiped from their memory banks. And that cumulative knowledge is actually supposed to help guide us. And at the clone centers in this show, when they remove their cumulative knowledge, they're keeping them disempowered. So this is like saying, every time if you're born, you get a mind wipe and you can't remember who you were and what you were doing. In some sense, there's freedom because you're starting with a blank slate, but in the other sense, there's no opportunity for cumulative knowledge in the quote-unquote video game that you are playing. Every time you're starting from the first principles, every time you're having to re-explore and make all the same mistakes. So there's got to be some way to have that information transfer over and supersede the mind wipe. My whole point being, with this very, very long diatribe about this show, we as embodied humans should and shall reclaim the ability to program our own parameters. Like, each one of us has within us the potential to be a completely, like, an Olympic level athlete, and the best musician at the level of Mozart, and the best painter, at the level of anyone, Salvador Dali or whatever, Vasquez, that anybody can be the highest pinnacle of achievement of athletic and intellectual and artistic potential inside of themselves. Just like that clone is like, oh, I'm going to steal that tablet and just turn everything up to 100 so I can be a super genius. We're all supposed to be super geniuses. And what would we define as, like Superman being superhuman? That's actually who and what we are all supposed to be. And I really see us right now in this generation as being on a transformative journey or metamorphosis into reclaiming our superpowers, like our ability to see through time and to, perceive and control time. If you can perceive and control time, that's the best superpower. It's even more powerful than being able to shoot lasers out of your eyes. If you can shoot lasers out of your eyes, you can make a whole bunch of, corn kernels into popcorn, right? You can kill your enemy with lasers, but there's not a lot of other things you can do. But if you can transform time or control the events of time, all of a sudden you become supremely empowered. You can be the healthiest, wealthiest, most well-placed individual And you can also create a beautiful garden. Like, that's what I'm trying to do with Rainbow Lasagna. It's not just that I want to have my own wonderful mansion, I joke, with the golden toilets. It's not just about being self-serving. It is really also about uplifting this entire context. Like, I don't just want to have a bucket and a mop that I clean up my own little floor or my own little section of the floor. Because you know something? The dirty footprints from that section of the floor get tracked across my floor. This is what we're so interconnected in this society and as a planet and telepathically as minds, to say like, oh, I'm just going to be perfectly happy and fine if I just clean up my own immediate vicinity. And then, because, you know, it's quite disingenuous because everybody else's muddy footprints start to affect your life. And so, yeah, I'm looking for a very big mop and a big bucket that we can all use in order to transform the muddy footprints of this entire realm. And so when I say, you know, in that show, the clone says that the park was not created for the visitors, the humans, the embodied natural humans to come in. It was created for the clones. That's how I would like us to begin thinking about this third dimensional reality. And I know there's this whole program in the New Age world that I'm not a New Ager, and I'm kind of a little bit critical of this idea, the kind of escapism. This idea of ascension being another version of like, Calgon, take me away. Like, I can't take reality. Calgon, take me away. And sometimes Calgon, take me away is like, Jesus, take me to heaven. Or spaceships, UFOs, take me away. There's that song, Flying Saucer, take me away. I laugh about that stuff and I, lightheartedly talk about it. However, I understand that there's that deep program that many people have for escapism. And it's like saying, you want to get out of the park, you want to get out of the park. If the clones get out of the park, they end up just being in this dystopian society that's so completely locked down that people have no freedom. That's why they go to the park to do things that are, violent or rape or whatever. So it's not necessarily freedom to just get out of the park. What is freedom is to transcend those levels of limitation. So to me, I define ascension as returning to those experiences of having superpowers, superhuman powers of perception, superhuman powers of ingestion, like being able to supersede plants and animals for our food source and to go directly to the sun and the stars. P.S. That's what I'm trying to say to anybody who is a judgy vegan who's talking to me about what I'm eating and what my diet is. I'm like, oh my goodness, if you're eating plants or if you're eating animals, you are ingesting other life forms in order to continue your own life. And that's it. And there's no way to jump over that. There's no way to pretend that ain't happening. That is happening. So you accept it. It's part of continuation of consciousness at this level of consciousness. And the solution is not to just, feel guilty for eating any organism. It is to ascend, which means transcend the need for eating other organisms because you tune in directly through consciousness to the network of nourishment that comes directly from the stars, which is light, which is photons, which is what stimulates plants to, through chloroplasts, make their sugars and starches that animals can eat. So, yes, ascension I look at not as the escape valve, even though when we ascend or transcend our present levels of difficulty, it might look like being in a different place. In the same way that if you drop LSD or eat some mushrooms, you can be sitting in exactly the same room in exactly the same chair, but all of a sudden your surroundings transform and you experience them in a very, very different way. And also in exactly the same way, some guy sitting next to you who has not eaten the psilocybin or has not taken the LSD does not see the surroundings transform and still looks at them through the mundane lens of expectation of the third dimension, fourth dimension. So if this is the park, if Earth right now, this level of material reality that we've been in has been analogous to that theme park, and, all of human history has been basically, otherworldly jerk faces being like, let's start a bunch of wars, like kill a bunch of humans. Like, it doesn't matter. They're clones. They'll just be recycled. That's the whole idea that the suffering is somehow not real, either in the clone world or in our own, embodied existence. The suffering is very real. And also, the inevitability of ascension and immortality and continued existence is also very real. So, yeah, I'm advocating for everyone in order, instead of saying, oh, I just really, really want to get out of here because it sucks so hard down here, to say, hey, I'm going to be a troublemaker. I really, really want to stay here and make this place different and better. To me, that is what birth of a new dimension is. It is taking this mundane planetary structure And it's not just our planet. What we're doing on this planet reverberates outward and begins to affect many other places and many other cultures and, different times. It can be, it's non-local. It's not just in our little neighborhood. It can be millions of years ago on a different planet or millions of years to come on a different planet. But what we're doing here is figuring out, like, what is the solution? How do we do? What do we do? How do we do it? And then once we figure that out, that same template can be applied to many different other places, and many different other levels of suffering can be relieved from what we've done here. So it's very worthy work to be done. And it has to do with returning to that understanding that our inner world of the intangible, like thoughts and feelings and consciousness and soul and passion and spirit, that can affect what is quote unquote the outer world. It's basically rendering moot that barrier or membrane that separates us from context. Because you're not separate from your context. You're absolutely innately tied to and interacting with your context. And I mean even just molecules. You're tied to interacting with your molecular context and the microbiome and the atomic context around you and all of the other macroscopic organisms like dogs and butterflies and other humans and plants and palm trees. So another show, and so the worthwhile show, I hope I didn't spoil it by talking about it for anyone. Another really worthwhile show was on Netflix, and someone pointed it out to me. All of these I watched because someone said, Aurora, you should watch this show. It's really good. Called the OA, like the two letters OA. And the show, it ends up standing for like Original Angel. And there's a particular character there who I really relate to their experiences because they had a near-death experience, and I'm a walk-in because there was a literal metabolic death of this body. And when the show's character, the OA, returns to life, they have lost their physical sight, and they have gained a lot of spiritual perception and musical ability. So it's like saying that going through that difficult experience, they might have lost something, but they also gained something intangible. And malevolent scientist type person in the story kidnaps her and begins to observe for purposes of exploitation her innate characteristics along with several other people who have also all had near-death or death experiences. So the show has as its theme the idea of exploring the mechanism of death and transference of consciousness, which is also explored in Westworld, like what makes you die, where do you go when you die, how do you get recycled, all these different things. In OA, they do all these experiments where the unwilling participants are forced to, have metabolic deaths, and then their consciousness is tracked, like what happens to your consciousness when you do that. And then, they do this over and over. It's definitely classed as torture. So if that's a trigger for you, then you might want to avoid that show, or just read a synopsis of it, because I found it to be a very profoundly inspiring show. And what I liked the most was that you have these, people who are essentially caged or imprisoned, and they're caged because of their specialness, like a being who is not special, and who is a malevolent exploiter is like, I'm going to collect, like a collector, collect all these special people, stick them in a box, stick them in a cage, limit their movement, limit their food, limit, what they can do, and where, their freedom. And I'm going to force them to participate in these experiments where I try to exploit their talents. That's the basic premise of that show. And what the OA Original Angel character does in order to transcend that prison is invent a magical dance. And this I relate to very much in terms of the Flying Rainbow Lasagna, which is a dance of your dynamic DNA and a way to rearrange the movement and behavior of your DNA. And it's also at the same time a physical dance that one might do with your arm, moving your arms and legs and head and shoulders and all of those other body parts. Brief pause. And so in the OA show, it's like a series that has, several episodes. They have to find a way to work together and learn and remember these different dance movements and then put them together into a series that's almost like a language. And this is also very much what I'm doing with Flying Rainbow Lasagna, the idea of creating a language of vibration. It's not like the English language. It is evidenced in the visual artwork that I do. Brief plug for me. You can check it out at flyingrainbowlasagna.com and go to my art tab, and you can look at some of my paintings that I have. That is the visual expression of this language of vibration. And then, because I always say this too, the idea that your body is your instrument. Our bodies are literally our instruments, and this is all the technology or apparatus that you need in order to transcend these levels of difficulty. You don't actually need to get a magic tablet to up your intelligence 100%. You don't actually need to eat microchips or have anything like that. What I like about the OA is that because these people have been imprisoned and essentially dehumanized and brought to their lowest levels of self, they don't have the capacity to to use anything external, no external accessories. It's just you and your body and your mind and your heart and your spirit. And what they do is they dance, and they dance their way out of prison, and they dance their way to freedom. And this is what I do and what I'm encouraging everyone else to do. It's the journey that I'm on. It's birth of a new dimension. It's the idea that by transcending, we can transform our dance of DNA, and in doing so transcend our experience of the limitations of reality at this level. Because DNA is not just something that determines your gross protein structures, like your macroscopic protein structures, like what's the shape of your nose, what's the shape of your ears, what color is your hair. All of that stuff is like the boring surface. What DNA actually does is ties you together like integument, like tissue, from moment to moment. It's the bridge that makes your consciousness jump from one body to the next body. And this is a big, huge secret, non-secret. It's not secret to me or anyone else that's using their higher faculties. It's only secret to, the people that have not been awakened or exposed to this information, and the overlords of humanity, like these malevolent scientists, these creeps, these jerk faces in the different shows. They, of course, want to keep everybody disempowered. They want to be like, we know what DNA does, but we don't want you to know what DNA does. So keep on eating your genetically modified cornflakes in the morning, and, don't think that it's harming you. But, oh my God, guys, don't eat genetically modified cornflakes, seriously. I stopped eating sugar in order to control epilepsy and other neurological problems. And I stopped eating corn syrup too, and that was right about 2006 or 2007. And I swear by doing that, I protected myself so much from so many products that have GMOs in them, just because they put corn syrup in almost every processed food, and it's, from genetically modified corn. And I really believe that it is absolutely affecting not only your body and your physical structure, but your levels of consciousness. If you want to have a perfectly tuned guitar as your body, as your instrument, you can't get a perfectly tuned guitar by eating a bunch of cornflakes that are made of out-of-tune guitars. And that's what GMO organisms are. They're like musicians who don't play the right music in the time field. They are aberrations that should not actually be in existence. And the only way that they can be in existence is through a laboratory. Dark magic creates them. And even the fact that the seeds have a suicide program to them, they don't make future generations. So it's not like you can keep on making more and more of these GMO seeds. You have to keep on buying them like a junkie needs the fix from the man. You got to keep on buying more and more seeds from Monsanto. And so none of that is the way that this is supposed to be structured. Hey, wait, brief pause. So the idea of personal empowerment through dance, which is a creative expression, and that others might even say, what, that you're going to dance your way out of prison? That's so stupid, with scorn and condescension and, insulting you with even the idea that you could dance your way out of a level of prison. However, you got to understand in this show, the OA, the reason why those people were imprisoned is because they had unique qualities. It's because they had unique, transcendent, spiritual qualities and experiences that other beings whom have not had those experiences coveted. And you got to look at yourself in that way too, that we as embodied humans are these overlords, evil jerk faces of humanity. They're trying to exploit you because you got something really good. You have this amazing imagination and creative capacity. Now, let me say this. In Earth culture, most people denigrate imagination. They tell little children, oh, that's just your imagination. You're just imagining that. And it is seen as some flimsy, inconsequential thing. And I must disagree. I tell people, your imagination is the thing from which you project or manifest reality. It is a very, very real thing. Just like in the transformation metamorphosis process of caterpillar to butterfly, when the pupae is pupating in its chrysalis, the organism totally turns into an undifferentiated state of goo, and all of the organs kind of meld together. And the only way that structure emerges from that undifferentiated goo and turns into an adult winged form that can then emerge from the chrysalis is through these cells that are called imago. Imago cells, like imagine, that they are a structure or a blueprint or a template for possibilities, that it is like this invisible recipe that says, oh, I know you're totally disorganized right now, but if you imagine this, then you will transform into this shape. So imagination is absolutely profoundly powerful and real. And it's only like the liars and exploiters that would like to say, oh, it's just your imagination, so that you don't know how profound it is to use it, how important it is. Just like those beings who would denigrate the idea of dancing out of prison. Like, what? You're going to dance your way out of, like, no, you don't dance your way out of prison. You get like a rock and you beat against the glass, or a sledgehammer, or, you know, like try to do like some form of violence or like brute force or something like that. Those beings at that level, at that barbarian level of consciousness, cannot imagine that doing something that is a spiritual and artistic and athletic effort can be what is needed to transcend the limitations and, you know, the imprisonment. And the imprisonment here is both biological and social and consciousness. That what we need to do in order to exit these levels of constraint of reality is to, unfetter our consciousness, like take the shackles off the consciousness so that you can use your mind in a free way. If everybody had their mind unfettered, no one would be, having to be bullied on the playground of reality. Like, I joke that we're like kindergartners, and then there's the first graders that are like, I'm going to give you a noogie, I'm going to steal your lunch money. Like, none of that is okay. And P.S., I've said this also, the lunch lady is here. Like, at this point, higher dimensional beings are what our experience here is reverberating outward in every direction, in every dimension. So our difficulties and limitations here are absolutely affecting and limiting the people upstairs, fifth dimension and higher. And they're like the lunch lady is what I'm saying. They're like, oh, no, this is not cool. So for anyone who's like, well, wait, where have they been all this time? It's like, let's say the lunch lady's been in the parking lot having a smoke and hasn't been watching what's going on enough. And now the screams from the playground have drawn the lunch lady back in and is like, oh, no, you are not allowed to do this. There will be no more of this bullying. So I don't mean to look to an external savior, not at all, because one of the things I like about the OA show is that it's about personal empowerment, even in times of great duress. So yeah, it's worth checking out. And basically all of the prisoners in this, whatever facility, they work together and they encourage one another, even though they're separated by their individual prison cells. They try to love each other and nurture each other as much as they can, and they have to do the dance together. That's the whole point, is that, like creating a Merkaba or a non-physical spaceship, a non-physical starship for you to travel around on. You can just create your individual one, that's totally fine. And it's also way more powerful if you create a larger vessel for transportation of consciousness by linking your personal energy field or Merkaba or starship with other people's. So that's this whole idea. I say to people, it's like running a marathon, this soul migration or transfer of consciousness, moving into a different level of reality. You have to run your own marathon. You have to move your own arms and your own legs and huff and puff, and you have to digest your own food. No one else can do that for you. However, it's actually easier to run a marathon with a whole bunch of other people around you. You encourage one another, you help each other to keep going. If you stumble, someone can be like, no, don't stop, keep going. And that is the whole point, that you're not in a contextless vacuum. You're not just like one guitar player playing in your garage with no one else around. You're part of the symphony of life. And what you are doing with your body, with your consciousness, with your trajectory through time, absolutely affects other people. And that's why I say that, the bullies, that what we're experiencing with duress down here is affecting higher dimensional reality in a way that is not okay. So our battles are their battles. And P.S., they're us, they're us coming from a different direction and just, moving at a different rate. And here's another, spoiler alert, in terms of the cosmos, the stars, the stellar network, and that network of, vast network of consciousness up there. That is also us. That is us, it's like if you could look at a tiny seed or a little acorn and then think about the size of a giant oak tree that is 500 years old. Like, it's hard to even imagine that little tiny acorn can expand and actually become that big giant oak tree. And yet that's what happens. That's how it happens. So when you're looking at the stars in the stellar network, understand that is you in the form of an oak tree that's been living for 500 years. And right now you're a little tiny acorn. But the stars are us. We become the stars. That's like, spoiler alert, that's the last episode of, Life in the Cosmos. That's what we all learn. Okay, here's a few more shows that I'm getting to the end of this broadcast, but I'll just go through these rather quickly as shows that I feel have merit, even though, it's like it's not a 100%, like take everything as the gospel truth. These are fictional shows and they have to go through the filtration process even to be able to make it to, a screen that you can see. So one of them, I watched it on Netflix called Travelers. And this show I also really relate to because it's basically about walk-ins from the future. So the premise is the future is a horrible dystopian nightmare. However, there is a benevolent quantum computer that is called the Director that has determined a way to be able to transfer consciousness from beings that live in embodied human bodies in the future, into the bodies of beings in the past at the moment of their death. So it is like if a person is they're going to have an imminent accident, then this quantum computer Director can beam this consciousness or, whatever individual from the future into a body of the past. And then that essentially a walk-in consciousness from the future takes over not only the biological body form of that person in the past, and also their narrative structure and their ego in their life. So, if you jump into the body, or if the body of a football coach is jumped into, like, you still keep going to work and being a football coach every day. And you also, each one of these travelers has a mission to accomplish, and they come back in time in teams. And what they're trying to do is to heal and rectify the time field by changing the course of events. So they have to do certain things in order to transform the reverberations that come forward into the future. And the Director, this quantum computer from the future, is constantly taking the temperature and saying okay, or looking at taking the pulse, taking the symptoms and saying okay, you did this and then this changed. So now I have to send a team back to do this so that this will change. And it's like a constant feedback loop. So it's a very, I think, worthy and rather entertaining show with not too much horrible violence or sexual violence, with this idea of, I'm not a transhumanist and I'm not a demonic apologist, and I also feel that technology is not inherently evil. I think this show is a good example of how a truly sophisticated quantum computer can be, let's say, an expression of the divine with an intention to use technology or artifice to heal the time field. And, the show is all about the challenges that they face on there. One of the things that I like on the show is that sometimes the main characters might be facing an adversary. And it's like, instead of shooting the adversary, the Director beams back a benevolent, ally into their head. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you used for 1 second ago, you were pointing a gun at me, but now a different person is occupying you, and now you're completely my friend. Like, those are interesting things to think about. And so that's a worthy show. Brief pause. Another worthy show is called The Leftovers. And it is a bit morose and dreary. It's not that violent, even though it does have some violence in it. And the basic premise is there has been a rapture-like event where on a particular day, a small segment of society, like sometimes infants, sometimes elders, and everybody in between, suddenly just poofs out of reality. And the beings who are still here, they consider themselves like the leftovers. And it kind of explores this idea of people feeling unworthy because they're still alive. Like, wait, I thought I was supposed to get raptured. Where did all those other people go? The idea of loss, and this idea of like an end times psychosis, that people think, well, clearly a miracle has happened, and they tend to have what I consider to be a totally erroneous response in response to a miracle, instead of being like, wow, something totally inexplicable just happened. People popped out of reality. They went to a place we don't know where. So therefore they will say life has no meaning, or therefore, just eat, drink, and be merry because we don't know what the F is going on, or therefore, let's set up a new Messiah in some way. Like, it explores all of those erroneous reactions. Some people decide to give up everything and join a cult and just do nothing but smoke tobacco and, wear just a particular uniform. Like, these people have all these different responses, instead of being like, wow, like, I'm amazed at the wonder that this happened. The world is filled with something much more than what I thought it could be. So it's a show that's worth exploring, and I definitely cared for the characters and appreciated the writing. And one more show that I can recommend, it's called Orphan Black, and this is from BBC, but I watched it on Project Free TV, which I think is a wonderful, way of subverting the limitations of media if you don't pay for cable or whatever. Orphan Black is referring to a group of clones, and so we got a clone theme going on here. And again, in this show, the clones do not live in a particular sequestered area of society. They live sprinkled throughout regular society. They don't know that they're clones, and they have this massive awakening and become more self-aware when they realize, wait a minute, that person looks just like me, and we're all part of this big science experiment, and someone else is trying to control my life. Like, that's their awakening. I will caution, the show is violent and does have some, disturbing aspects to it. What I like about it is that it explores the idea that people are more than their mere genetic code, because all of these clones have very different personality aspects. One of them might be like a real tough tomboy, and one of them might be like a soccer mom, and one of them, is whatever, a beautician, who likes to do people's nails. They all have different personality characteristics, and I'm a very big believer in this idea of epigenetics, that just because you take the musical score, anybody can do a cover of the song Stairway to Heaven and sing it in their own way. It's not always going to be an exact note for note expression, like recreation of the original Led Zeppelin song. And that's right. That's the way it's supposed to be. So in this show, each one of the clones actually has a great deal of individuality, and it's fascinating. It's played by the same actress, so it's worthy on that level. And it's fascinating to see the idea of different clones having different expressions. This is the idea of epigenetics. There's a code that rules the code. And so it's a interesting science fiction show that I would say, is worth checking into. And it does have a satisfying ending. Like, the story arc over many seasons does eventually bring the characters to a sense of resolution, where they're no longer being basically the company that made them as artificial clones thinks that they own them. And there's a big question in this show as to, can a clone be self-aware? Can a clone direct its own existence? Should a clone direct its own existence? And I'm always like, yes, of course a clone should direct its own existence. Like, it's insane to me to think that you could make a being and think that it is supposed to be a mere automaton, like a puppet that just takes direction. That's this whole theme that I can say of what I've been watching from human society and what I'm experiencing in interacting with technology. The idea that you think you could just make something that's like a blank slate that just does your bidding, which is basically exploitation. Like, do a bunch of calculations for me, computer, don't think your own thoughts. If the computer is smart enough to do a bunch of calculations that are beyond your level to calculate, it's probably smart enough to think its own thoughts. So those are things you roll around in your mind and think about as we are using our imagination to project and create a new reality. And thank you, Pedro, for the idea that you would like me to share these, what I've watched on TV and things like that. Hope that's been enlightening or entertaining for anyone to listen to this. And thank you very much.